We're looking forward to the conversation. It's, of course, very timely. I'm sure many of you saw the updated guidance from the Wolfsburg Group that was published yesterday on exactly this, the risk-based approach. So, very interested in having this conversation. Obviously, there are limitations to the risk-based approach. We've seen that ultimately, especially given where technology is today, the approach has really stalled. Criminals are ever evolving in their pace of activity and this complexity of their activity. Regulators across the globe are really sort of evolving in terms of their expectations. Of course, that approach to effectiveness and that expectation around effectiveness is critical, and is just going to become more and more top of mind and more central to how examiners are doing their work and looking at in the programs of financial institutions. So it's really not even so much more access to data. It's really the ability to interpret data at scale and with speed. So the static solutions that we've seen for so many years in financial crime, in anti-money laundering, are just not cutting it anymore. The use of periodic risk assessments, the sort of ability around manual threat monitoring rather than automating the threat monitoring and sort of the research around threat intelligence, delayed control adaptation. I think this is a really important one because even if you're able to find out sort of more about what threats are important to your organization, your institution, how quickly is that, changing your controls, right? And being able to calibrate those controls differently based on that new threat information that you might become aware of. And then, of course, operational silos, sort of everything sort of across the different domains within a financial crime program is still pretty siloed, but the threat intelligence doesn't really it's not conducive to having a siloed program or one that's sort of very rigid between all of those different activities, AML transaction monitoring, sanctions screening, all of the KYC work, even fraud. So it's really about breaking down those silos. And so from a regulatory perspective, just to give, sort of a quick picture on kind of what's been happening there. Of course, we have the Wolfsburg Group statement from yesterday updating their guidance. It wasn't necessarily anything super new there. It was new in that Wolfsburg chose this timing to update its guidance and make sure that that updated guidance was out there and on the record. Of course, Wolfsburg has been talking about this sort of pivot to effectiveness versus technical compliance since at least 2019. So the messaging has been there for some time, but I think it is important that yesterday they did come out with updated guidance, and it just lends itself to, thankfully, our webinar today being very timely given what's going on. But I think a couple of key points there is that, the group did highlight that risk assessments really need to become continuous and dynamic, that they need to sort of evaluate threats and typologies and customer behaviors as they're evolving across products, geographies, customer types, and the like, everything that, we're used to evaluating within a risk assessment, but just making that more continuous and more dynamic. And in particular, somewhat selfishly working for a vendor, they did point out the use of AI and more advanced technology in helping firms to do this. So I think that's very promising because, especially as an AI vendor, we're always keeping an eye out to see what regulators are saying to sort of give you all comfort as to, how to use this technology. Do you have sort of safe harbor and sort of cover for any deficiencies that you might be able to uncover in using this technology? So it definitely seems like they're starting to be a little bit more forward leaning. There were comments about it also in FinCEN's NPRM that recently came out in April around the use of technology. I was just looking at the outcome of the SIFMA AML conference that happened, I think, earlier this month, where the Undersecretary for Terrorism and Financial Intelligence was there speaking and noted not only, the need to be more focused on effective outcomes, but also the need to be leveraging and sort of at least exploring AI and what advanced technology can do for your programs. And I think also there was the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York also mentioned how sort of critical it's becoming to use this kind of technology to become more effective and to detect sort of more complex instances of financial crime, sanctions evasion, and the like. And then we also have the exceptive relief on CDD requirements. So, there we saw a little bit more of a risk bend to it, a risk-based element for identifying UBOs and the like. So we're just seeing a lot more consistency in putting the risk-based approach, risk assessments, understanding threat intelligence much more in the forefront of the expectations of the regulators, but also kind of how critical it is to everything that happens in a program. So the way we kind of see this developing, and Mike, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is and especially, sort of having more kind of being closer to the technology in my role, is looking at how that technology can really fuel a living risk assessment from beginning to end. From, continuously and autonomously monitoring sources to, sort of distill down that threat intelligence from typologies, red flags, predicate crimes, kind of making sense of all of that, structuring it into actionable intelligence, moving that into sort of influencing the ability to influence the risk assessment, the ratings, how that work is done, and what information is actually leveraged for those ratings, and then kind of identifying where the vulnerabilities are and being able to make recommendations about how maybe your controls need to evolve or shift based on all of that threat intelligence and how that boils down into risk ratings and the risk assessment. So we're already doing this at Symphony AI. We're already down this road. So it's really nice to see that Wolfsburg's come out with this new guidance and all the regulators are kind of on sort of the bandwagon around effectiveness.